Welcome to the ITFreeTraining video on deploying roles to a VHD. A VHD is a virtual drive stored in a file. With Windows Server 2012 comes the ability to add roles and features to an offline VHD file. This allows you to perform some administration on an offline server, something that has never been possible to do before. In this video, I have a server that is running Hyper-V. This Hyper-V server is running a virtual machine. This virtual machine's hard disk is virtualized to a VHD file. The VHD file is essentially a file on the Hyper-V server's hard disk like any other file on the hard disk. On a large network, a lot of administrators will choose to perform their administration from a workstation. In this video, I will use a desktop computer with remote administration tools installed to access the Hyper-V server and make changes. In order to do this, I need to make some firewall changes and create a share on the Hyper-V server to access the VHD file. The end result is that I will be able to add a role to the VHD file on the Hyper-V server from remote. I will now change to my Windows 8.1 computer with remote administration tools installed to look at how to install a role on the VHD file. Before starting the install, you need to ensure that the virtual machine using the VHD file is shut down. In the real world, if the virtual machine was already running, you would most likely use Server Manager to connect to the server and perform the install. If you have a situation in which the virtual machine has been shut down, the procedure outlined in this video can be quite useful. First of all, I will run Server Manager. My Hyper-V server that is holding the VHD file has not been added to Server Manager. To add it, I will right-click All Servers and select Add Servers. From Add Servers, I will add my Hyper-V server, SRv6. In order to set up a file share on the Hyper-V server, I first need to make some changes to the firewall rules on the Hyper-V server to allow computer management to make changes to it. Without these firewall changes, computer management will not be able to connect up to the server. To make these changes, I will right-click on the server and select Windows PowerShell. The first command that I will run is netsh adv firewall. NetSH is a tool that makes changes to network configuration on the firewall. The ADV firewall indicates that changes are to be made using the advanced firewall interface. The next parameter is firewall. This indicates that changes made using the advanced firewall interface will be made to the firewall. The next parameter is set rule, followed by the firewall rule group to be set. In this case, the rule is Windows Management Instrumentation. The last part of the command is new enable equals yes. This means the firewall rule will be added. Once the command has been run, notice that 4 rules have been updated. 2 groups of firewall rules need to be enabled in order to allow computer management access to the server. The second command that I will run is the same as the first command. However, the group of rules this time is Remote Event Log Management. After the command is run, 3 more rules will be updated and the firewall configuration is complete. I can now exit out of PowerShell. To open Computer Management, right-click on the server and select Computer Management. From here, I will expand down through Shared Folders to Shares. I will then right-click on Shares and select the option New Share. This will launch the Create a Share folder wizard, which creates the share on the remote computer. Once past the welcome screen, I next need to browse to the folder on the computer that contains the Hyper-V files. Once located, it is just a matter of selecting it and moving on to the next screen of the wizard. On the next screen, I will change the name of the share so that the hyphen is removed and thus the share name is just Hyper-V. On the next screen, I need to configure the permissions. For this, I will select the option Customize Permissions and then press the button Custom. The default permissions are read-only for everyone. I do not want everyone having access, so I will remove these permissions. I then add the permissions for domain admins and give them full control. When Server Manager modifies the VHD, it does it by mounting the VHD on a remote computer and then sending the commands to that server to be executed. For this reason, the process will fail with the current set of permissions. To enable it to work, I also need to add the system user. Once added, I need to also make sure that the system users have read and write access. Now that the required permissions have been added, I can now finish the wizard to create the share. Now that the share has been created, I can access the files from another computer. From Server Manager, I will now select Manage and then select the option Add Roles and Features to add a role to the VHD file. Once past the welcome screen, on the next screen I need to keep the default option Role-Based or Feature-Based Installation. On the next screen, you need to select the option Select a Virtual Hard Disk. The next step is to select a server that the VHD will be mounted to. Mounting allows that server to make changes to the VHD file. Although you could choose any server, it is advisable, when possible, to choose the server that is hosting the VHD file, or at least a server that has a high-speed connection to the VHD file. The next step is to enter in the location of the VHD file, which is on the file share that was created earlier. Once entered, I can press Next, and Server Manager will attempt to connect to that VHD and retrieve its contents. The next part of the wizard will show which roles are already installed. In this case, I will add the role Active Directory Domain Services. When prompted, I will also add the additional features that it asks for. On the next screen, the wizard will ask if I want to add any additional features. In this case, I do not, so I will move on. The next screen will give me some additional information about Active Directory Domain Services. Once I am past this screen, the next screen will confirm what is going to be installed. To start the install, all I need to do is press Install. The install will now complete in the same way as if you installed it on a local server. It takes a minute or so to complete, but I've sped up the process. Once complete, I will right-click the Start icon and select Search, and search for the Hyper-V Manager. Once Hyper-V Manager is opened, I will start up the virtual machine. The Hyper-V Manager is not part of Remote Server Administration Tools in Windows 8.1. If you find it is not present, you will need to add the feature Hyper-V Management Tools. Once the virtual machine has booted up and I have logged in, I will next open Server Manager on the virtual machine. Once Server Manager has loaded, notice that Active Directory Domain Services has been added and can be seen on the left-hand side. Also, notice that at the top right, there is a warning message. This is stating that the server is required to be promoted to a domain controller. When adding roles and features to a server, it is important to remember that these roles and features are not configured. If they do require post-configuration to be performed, you will need to do this at a later time. That's it for deploying roles and features to offline VHD files. I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope to see you in future videos from us. Thanks for watching.